Welcome back to another episode of the Queerly Blax Show. We are joined today with some very special gentlemen from the Surface Level Podcast. We have Mr. Jordan Randall and Mr. Tony. Y'all tell the people about yourselves. Jordan, you go ahead, kick it off.
All right, yeah. So I'm Jordan. I'm gay. I'm from Trenton, New Jersey. I went to Howard University for undergrad. I studied marketing. I currently live in New York City. And like I said, we, Tony and I, and then there's a third person, Devon Epps, we host Surface Level Podcast, which is creating a community of queer and Black folks who are fearless in thought and curious at heart. So that's what we try to do, is try to have a lot of conversations that are affecting our community. So we pick a different topic every week and we sort of go beneath the surface level.
Yeah. And hey, everybody. So I'm Tony. I'm also gay. And I went to Howard University as well. But I was born in the Bronx, raised in Virginia, small county called Buckingham in central Virginia, nearest to Charlottesville. That's where people most are familiar with. And I live in New York. I live in Harlem. And like I said, I went to Howard University. I majored in journalism with a concentration in advertising. And I, too, am a host of Surface Level Podcast. And as Jordan, along with everything that Jordan mentioned, it's like we really wanted to also just take a look at like what society deems as what a queer Black man is, and really kind of debunk those expectations, those societal expectations.
Dope, man. Yeah. So let's just jump right in. So I listened to, some of y'all podcast episodes, and I think, going all the way back to the beginning, and talking about your coming out stories. And Tony, I know you had talked about your relationship with your dad and how you kind of just were like, you know what, I'm gonna just tell them now. You guys driving in a car, ripped it off. Talk about that. Tell the people about your journey, especially from the perspective of course, with manhood and, people being very afraid of what that looks like. Tell the people about your story, and then, of course, Jordan, follow them up.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's interesting, like, because I grew up in a household with, my mom primarily raised me. So I only remember like visits with my father as a kid. And as I was growing up and realizing like who I am and becoming more of, my queer self, my gay self, I never really thought about too much of like how he would feel about it, to be honest. But my father has always been very nurturing, very loving. He's always loved on me. And even though like you always hear your parents know about, your sexuality before you actually verbalize it. And I think he probably knew, but for me, like I said, it was we were hanging out here in Harlem one night. We were out for drinks, and I was dating someone I was in a serious relationship with, and kind of had that liquid courage probably. And we're riding in the car, and I literally had a moment. I'm texting, my then partner at the time, and I was like, "Dad, I want you to meet my boyfriend." And he was like, "Your what?" And I was like, "My boyfriend." And he kind of like paused for a second, then he was like, "Okay," like, and it was like we continued the night. But what was interesting to me is after telling him that, he kind of talked to me about his own sexuality, and he although he's a heterosexual man, he expressed to me that when at a certain point in his life, he did have thoughts and curiosities. And so I thought it was like, oh wow, I got to have a different conversation with him based on me just being vulnerable and sharing more of who I am.
How deep did he go with that?
He didn't go too deep. He kind of just was like, I had thoughts, and I thought maybe he kind of questioned his own sexuality for a second. But I thought that was something we don't get to hear.
Yeah,
because
very vulnerable even for him to say that at all. Yeah,
exactly. And so the moment just brought us closer, and I'm happy because I have a positive story. Like a lot of people don't have a positive story. My father didn't treat me any differently. And as a matter of fact, I think he even is more protective of me. So, but that was my experience with coming out to my dad, which was interesting. So
yeah, I think you many people, you told them after you had a boyfriend, which is something I've seen a lot, like in stories. Like it's one of those things where you can do it for somebody else, but sometimes don't have the courage to do it for yourself. I had, I would say the deeper, because on me, like you, I was like, my parents, they gotta know. Like, I mean, come on. I mean, I played basketball, but like, come on. Like, I'm not walking around like dresses and like all that. Like, come on,
Right,
but
right.
the same, like, had the deeper conversations once I was in a relationship. It's like, okay, I feel like I could do it for somebody else, but like, just for myself, I couldn't really get there. But our friend Jordan,
Yeah.
was the brave one. The one thing that's cool about your story, talking about, well, cool, but traumatic at the same time, talking about the homeless guy, this super extreme version. So talk about for you, some of the fears that you had, obviously, with the homeless guy being the representation, and then your family and being from the church and stuff like that.
Sure. So to give context to what you're referencing, so just for reference, this episode where we talk about our coming out stories is called "Dad, I'm a Bottom." We came out with that episode in our season 1, so you have to scroll back a little bit. But very vulnerable stories for all of us. My relationship with my father is similar to Tony, where I stayed primarily with my mother, and I spent time with my father. So I spent summers in Michigan with my father's side of the family, the school year with my mother. And my father's side of the family is pretty religious and very, 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 I guess, intolerant of homosexuality. That's like the one thing in the Bible that they really latch on to, and it's just like, absolutely not. And there was this homeless guy who used to just be around the neighborhood that my father's house was at. His name was Goulash, and he presented as gay. I don't know what he identified as, but he had a tank top. He would like turn it in, and when people would like take a tank top and they tuck it in, like it turns into like a bra kind of.
Situation.
Yes, he had his tank top was like that, and he would chase people around, and I just remember, not really seeing too many people who were gay growing up. And for that to be sort of the representation in my neighborhood, it made me feel like, that my father didn't really understand the full diversity and texture of the community, and that he just had this one isolated reference point. And so when I came out to my father, it was after I graduated college, and after I moved to New York. I also got some liquid courage as well, lots of champagne that night before I could build up the courage to tell my father. And it didn't go like how I wanted it to go. It wasn't, an aggressive situation, but he told me flat out that he didn't support it. He told me that he loved me, but he doesn't support it. And to this day, it's just something that we don't talk about. We'll talk about every other thing going on in my life, but I don't think there's an interest in, sort of my romantic side of my life, or who I'm dating, or when I might get married or starting a family. So religion has been a barrier in my relationship with my father. So that relationship has been kind of strained, because as I get older, I'm not really interested in having relationships where I can't have the full extent of myself. But that's been my experience, and well, therapy is definitely paying off for that part. But yeah, I think it's a common story for a lot of people in our community.
I want to talk a little bit about, like, parental allyship, and how important it is to have the support of your family, right? Because I think in the queer world, you hear two perspectives, right? You hear some people who are like, well, you don't got to accept me and like whatever. And then there's some people who I think like want to push that narrative forward. Like, no, like it matters that you accept me. Like it matters to me, and I'm okay. I'm vulnerable enough to admit to you that matters to me, and I'm willing to risk our relationship to push this forward. Like I have to challenge you to change. Like I have to. So talk about for you guys how important that is in both of your journeys with both of your families, your parents, and just like people in your immediate circles.
I mean, I definitely can identify with that phase of like feeling like I don't give a fuck what anyone thinks. If you ain't fucking me, you ain't feeding me, you ain't financing me. Like, it was the 3 Fs. You ain't fucking me, you ain't feeding me,
Amen.
you ain't financing me. Like, once I felt like I was, able to be independent in terms of like, I'm taking care of myself, I'm not in the household, I really started to give less fucks about like what anyone, thought, and family in particular. Because that's always looming in the back of your head. Like, what are they gonna think? And so when I just had to like let go of that thought process and, really live my life. And I carried myself, I didn't really do a whole bunch of code switching and being one way. Obviously I'm not my full self the way I'm around my family, the way I was around like friends. But however, I still, for the most part, like I wasn't like trying to make my voice deeper or trying to be more masculine and butch it up. Like, I didn't do any of that. Now, on the flip side of that, I do, now because I think I have one of the unique situations where both my parents accepted me. And when I verbalized to both of them that I was gay, I didn't get the backlash or the disappointment or any of that. And so and I realized it was important. I, as much as I was like, fuck what anyone thinks, and I'm gonna do me, like, that support does matter.
Yeah, 100%.
It really does. And when you sit with yourself and you have a moment to think about it, you're like, I am hurt. If my parents kind of don't accept me for my whole self, that is heartbreaking.
Yeah, I think that I completely agree. That was one of the frustrations that I had with my therapist, is that my therapist was pushing me to move beyond my relationship with my parents because they were disappointing. And I just didn't agree with that. That's not the culture that I was raised in. And that wasn't something that I was prepared to do. But I will say that moving to New York, a coping mechanism for me was distancing myself from my family. I spent a lot of years just sort of pouring into friends, which have become my family over time. But I think that as I'm getting older, I think that as my parents, their health is becoming more of a concern. My dad had a scare with COVID earlier this year. I'm realizing that I need to be a little bit more proactive because I actually do really care about these relationships, regardless of their thought about my sexuality or who I'm supposed to be with. These are the people who supported me and showed me love growing up. And if they're having difficulty understanding one aspect of my identity, for me, that's not a deal breaker for our relationship forever. And for me, it is important. And I have a hard time sort of disengaging with my parents, knowing that, it probably just requires a little bit more effort on both of our parts and that we didn't try everything that we could have yet.
Yeah.
But Jordan, because you raised a good point about you being proactive. And I'm like, I know as the children, we think like, why am I the one that has to be the adult and like raise the conversation? And I think I remember talking to you about being like, sometimes that's the role we have to play because we are a little bit further in thought process than they are. And we have to bring them to where we are. So.
And also, I think that as we get older, you just realize, like, as you become grow into the adult that you are today, I think that you realize, like, yeah, these are my parents, but these are still just like human beings, adults who have communication issues, who have like conflict management issues, don't know how to like mediate like difficult things. Like, no one, just because they're your parent doesn't mean that they are just naturally stronger. Right, they might not have the tools, and their parents may not have the tools, so
yeah, they're just
whoever
older.
has them.
They just happen to be older. And I always the way that I kind of communicate that is like, I think every generation has their own burden to carry, right? And I always talk about how for us being educated and being Black, you operate in corporate America in these spaces where sometimes people have never even experienced a Black person, right? Like, I had a boss that had never interacted with a Black person. She worked in a like small accounting firm, and then coming to the Fortune 500 company we were working at, she was like, I didn't really like interact. My world was not Black, right? So there's all these. I hate to call them burdens, but that's what they are, right? Is they're seeing us and experiencing us for the first time. And they're like, your hair is different, or the way that we talk is different, where we we were raised in a very strong, expression of how we feel. And, we talk with our face, and, culturally we're just different. And so a lot of times, and my wife is on the other side. Me, I'm like, you know what, if people are asking questions about being Black or being gay, I just answer them freely. She's like, no, like, don't touch my hair, don't ask me about that. You have Google just like I do, don't ask me nothing. And that's for her. She's like, no, like, they need to get with it, like, I'm not about to.
Your wife sounds like our third host of the show, Damon. Very much that mentality.
Yeah, like, she's like, no, you go do it yourself. You have Google, you can figure everything else out. Like, leave me alone. But I think on top of that, then we're gay. So it's like, okay, so not only do I have to deal with this at work of being Black and, assimilating to this culture, but now I got to be at home and I got to teach you about, like, don't call a man a derogatory word that or don't call me a dyke, or don't now I have to educate you on this, or don't ask how we have sex, or don't ask me these weird questions. Like, now I got to come over here and talk to you about this too, so it's just that extra layer. So to your point about parents, like, they don't know. We can challenge them in the way that we choose. Like, if it's, okay, I'll have this conversation with you, or like, Mom, really? Like, this is what you're gonna do? So talk about like experiences where like you've had to, like, you've looked at somebody like, really? Like, are we still here? Have you guys had those experiences?
I'm trying to think.
Recently, no. And also, like, I just think that now I just kind of, and I'll speak more so to like the gay thing, because I feel like the environments that I'm at in New York City, most people have had experience with Black people. So for like the gay thing, I just lean into it. Like, if I'm in like a corporate environment, I'll just casually like bring up like, oh, I'm going on a date with this guy tomorrow. Like, I don't make it like a big thing, but I do like let people know, who I am, just so that we can just like, let's avoid all of the awkward, like, what's going on. Like, it doesn't need to be strange. Like, you wouldn't be strange with me talking about, whatever guy you think is handsome, like, or what celebrity crush you have. Like, let's not act like I have to, like, gather everybody in the conference room and make an announcement. So I haven't really had those moments yet. And honestly, with my family, or my dad's side of the family, they just ignore it. They don't bring up anything with sexuality. My mom's side of the family, they are starting to lean into conversations about it. And they are starting to like test the waters. They were really nervous for a long time because I don't think they knew what questions were appropriate, to your point. And they weren't necessarily doing the research either. So they just, their solution was to just hold back. But I think honestly, starting the podcast has made a lot of people in my life and around my life more comfortable having conversations with me as it pertains to my sexuality, because I think they're seeing that I'm more comfortable with it.
Yeah. As it relates to the office, it's like you got to normalize just being yourself. So when you casually drop like, oh, my boyfriend, or oh, I'm going on a date with, like, you do it like it's normal, because it is. You don't make it a big deal. And outside of that, office chatter happens. So if you don't, people are going to have a narrative for you. People are going to. So Jordan, what do you think about, like, it gives that in the office space?
Did you see the Ellen DeGeneres show last night? You're like, seriously?
And when as it relates to family, like, I never really had a moment that felt like I was being something was being dangled in front of me, that in a way that was like, that I'm not into that. There was sort of like what Jordan was saying, when the family starts talking and having conversations about you. I do remember, like, one of my aunts came up to me and she was like, I know. And this is my aunt I'm cool with. And so and I was like, okay. And she was like, but I need to know, and I want to know, because like family is asking, like, what should I say? Do I need to have the united front? And I was like, don't say anything.
Right.
I was like, don't say anything.
Yep. Wow.
So that was yeah.
She's like, I know. So you're not hiding from me. I got it. I'm with you. I got you. I love it. So talk about the podcast. So some of the topics I kind of want to know, like, have the feedback from people who've been freed from you guys' podcast, and then does your family listen, and what are some of the I would say more controversial things that you guys have talked about on the show and have gotten like feedback from, that you've been like, all right, okay, I think we're moving towards something here.
Tony, do you want to give the origin story?
So, all right. Well, the podcast really, it started as like me, Damon, Jordan will be sitting, having what we call like a sit and sip, drinking our wine, catching up on our weeks. And one of our Howard friends, we have a tight knit community at Howard. She FaceTimed us and she was joking, but said, you guys should start a podcast. But then she wasn't joking, because she called again one time and she was like, no, you guys need to start a podcast. And we're like, everyone's doing a podcast. Like, why should we, what do we have to offer? And so Jordan, Damon, and I sat and we looked at each other and we said, we have these careers, let's put some of our talents to use for something for ourselves. And we decided in an instant to do the podcast. And so traditionally, we talk about things that aren't, like, we don't really cover pop culture. We do very topical conversations around dating, around sexual health, around different things. Like we've talked about fatphobia and body image. We've talked about growing up or not growing up in the Black church, and the Black church relationship with the queer community. And so the feedback has been overwhelming. So many people have reached out saying that different episodes, for whatever reason, have really touched them and really given them a perspective or let them be seen. I've talked about my sexual status with being HIV positive, and that was a big deal because I hadn't talked about that, in a public way ever. And the podcast gave me that platform. There were friends and family, including my mom and dad, that I hadn't spoken to. I did tell my dad before the episode came out, but my mom didn't know until after, and I was able to tell her myself. But when you asked about who listens to the podcast, I have cousins that are younger that listen to the podcast. When I say younger, like my age and a little bit younger, but like my mom and dad aren't really like savvy on the podcast front. And so I think my dad listened to like the very first episode and he was like, you guys sound smart. And I was like, thank you. But yeah, Jordan, what your take on feedback? And
I think that the feedback that we've been getting is that it's been helping a lot of people have conversations, uncomfortable conversations with their circle. There's people that respond to our Instagram account and they'll let us know that, our episode helped them come out to their family. That happened. There was one guy who was a little older, who was struggling with his identity, and he felt like, if he did come out, it was going to be all these consequences, but he has this other life that he's living. And these are very real things that are happening in our community. And I think the reason why we wanted to do the podcast is for several reasons, right? We wanted to show what healthy friendship looks like in the Black queer community. And we wanted to be able to tackle conversations and things that actually affect our community in a serious way, while also providing levity and inspiring people to, like, it's okay. It's not like all these odds are stacked up against us, but you can still find happiness and friendship and in the family that your what do we call them? Not your
chosen family.
Your chosen family. Yes. I was like, wow, what? So it's really about establishing a community, which we're really, really proud of. People have been really receptive to it. And the conversations have been pretty controversial to your point. I think one topic in particular that garnered the most engagement was our conversation around fatphobia. And I think it's because body image is a huge aspect of queer culture. You can see it clear as day on TV. I think that gay men are sort of shown to be like these super vapid and just sort of body obsessed people. And, that affects our community. That representation affects our community in a real way, because it disenfranchises and deprioritizes certain body types. And I think that what we learned through that conversation is that a lot of people didn't really take that phobia seriously. And there was a strong debate with our community of does it exist, or are we creating a new phobia that it's not a real thing. So I love that the conversations are creating a bigger conversation outside of our platform.
Well, the big fellas ain't getting no love. What's going on?
Listen, that's what's happening. When you look on Instagram and you look at like the Instagram pages that are celebrating queer Black men, they all look like bodybuilders. And if they and immediately after that they look like fashion models.
This is true.
Like so it's a real thing that's happening. So
yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I don't know, that's with women, I don't think that's as big of a thing. I mean, I know obviously, everyone has preferences, but that's interesting. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, but I think that kind of would make sense to me. I like you saying that. I don't think I've like heard that point of view, but like Jordan was saying, when it comes to very specifically within the gay community, your image and looking a certain way is very much so, a lot of what the lifestyle entails. It's like, and it's looking good, and then you're going out to, like, especially if you're in a metropolitan city like we are here in New York, or if you're in LA or somewhere like where how you look is a big part of how people like consume you,
value you.
And
yeah, no, that makes sense to me. And I'm glad you brought up metropolitan areas. I wanted to talk to you guys about dating in transient cities, right? Because I think, like, obviously DC and places like DC, New York, LA, Atlanta to an extent, dating in those cities, I'm curious about, from my perspective, because I've been in a relationship for so long, right? Like for me, it's like, one relationship and not experiencing the dating aspect. There are a lot of people who do though. And I know for us, living in a major area is important because of representation. It just is what it is. Like I can't live in the middle of nowhere because I'm a gay Black woman. And that's just for me. That's just what it is, right? And I think, but then also the next level of having to date, right? Like, but dating in a transient city, a place where people are kind of moving in and out, right? Like you could meet somebody, have a great connection, and they're like, yeah, but I'm leaving in a month, or I'm leaving in a year, right? To go, whether they're a creative and they, travel a lot, or whether they're, moving around for their corporate career, or they're just like, yeah, I'm just here for a little while to test it out. So if you talk about your experiences with that, just in terms of building community and then also dating in places where people are just kind of moving pretty rapidly.
I actually would like take like a slight pivot on that, because I in my dating experience, being in big cities, the issue was less about people and how long they were going to be in the city, and more about like the volume of options in the city. So it's transient in that way, right? Like everyone's coming and going, and it just
they moving through people instead of cities.
Exactly.
Very much so.
It's New York City, Los Angeles, like there's so much going on, and if you stay in these cities long enough, you sort of build that fast-paced lifestyle where it's always like, it's competitive here, and not just in the dating scene. It's competitive professionally. Like the rents are crazy, so you have to figure out how you're going to hustle and get your bag. And I think similarly with dating, I think that there's so many options. So it's like everyone's sort of just like, is this what I want to do with the rest of my life, or is this what I want to do with the rest of my life? And I think it's more difficult to sort of the idea of settling, I think, is a little bit less appealing in a city where there's so many options and you feel like you always find better ones every day. And that's sort of been the experience that I've noticed, is that, people just aren't really willing to settle down, and the data shows it, right? Like people in bigger cities get married much later than people in smaller cities. But to your point, Ashley, I'm not moving. I'm not going to be in a small city. I knew growing up, I was just like, okay, I need to move to New York or LA. Those are my only options in America. Like, I can't go anywhere else because I need gay clubs. I need the gay community. I need to go somewhere where I'm celebrated and I feel comfortable. I don't want to be somewhere where I'm sneaking around and, I'm one of few. So what do you think, Tony?
Yeah, I think that you hit the nail on the head with regards to there just being so many options. Like when people say, "Oh, you live in New York City," like, dating has to be everything. Like you have a lot of options, and that's also that's the good and the bad. It's a double-edged sword there because everyone always feels like there's something better out there, and that's why it's so hard to settle, because you always feel like you check off a lot of boxes, but I feel like there's somebody out there that probably checks off even more boxes. Or just, to take it in through a different lens, it's giving Temptation Island. So it's like,
seriously.
Wow.
So it's like now I think I don't know for you, Ashley, but in recent days, there's a lot of new conversation around non-monogamy, being more open in relationships. And
we closed over here, baby. The streets ain't calling me. I'm gonna help y'all numbers. I'm gonna help y'all numbers out. I ain't gonna make this no complicated. I'm out.
So I think that it's interesting because that's now I'm noticing, and I think Jordan can say the same, is that there are a lot of more people whose ways of thinking about like what it means to be in a traditional relationship. It's different.
It's giving very Will and Jada.
It's giving, you can have your cake and eat it too. So
it's giving create the world you want, create the life you want.
It's giving entanglement.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's interesting because what do you guys notice like a pattern of that? Because I do understand that. And do you feel like, to even kind of go back to the fatphobia thing, right? When you have so many options and you're like for you guys, right? You're serious with somebody, say maybe like a year or something like that. And then they're like, but I don't really know. Do you exit the situation feeling like, okay, ain't nothing wrong with me, we just live in New York and you just doing the most? Or do you kind of take the relationship and feel like I have to continue to improve myself, but not because you personally decided that, but because this situation forced you to reflect and be like, is there something more that I need to do? And then going back to the fatphobia thing, do you feel like that also is a part of dating in that type of environment where you feel like you have to be the best of the best for someone to consider you at that level of like commitment? Like this is a part of that package.
Yeah. I mean, I think to answer your first question, I take sort of like rejection or things ending really, really personally. So I think for a long time in my dating experience, when the other person decided that they weren't interested, I immediately took that as I did something wrong, or like I needed to like reflect. And I'm in a place now where I'm kind of realizing that a lot of people are dealing with a lot more than they actually communicate. And I think that people back away from situations for a lot of different reasons. Like I know someone, they actually like told me, like they actually broke it down to me after like maybe a year after we stopped talking, that they had abandonment issues with their parents. And that being like, they felt like they were getting too close to me. And I guess the fear of me not being there was greater than their confidence that they should move forward with a full relationship. And I didn't have that context before. Before I was just thinking like, what's wrong with me? You know what I mean? And I think that helped me understand that people deal with so much more trauma than we'll ever know, because, we're not, especially our generation, is not really accustomed to sharing all of our vulnerabilities. I think the younger generation is becoming more comfortable with, being expressive and showing people when they're sad or when they feel less than. we are still working through that. You know, our generation is the generation that's getting into therapy. So I think that's one of the things to consider with dating. And then in terms of just like making yourself, I guess, a valuable or a eligible bachelor, I do think about that. I do think that your image plays a role. Like Tony and I, we live in New York City. We both worked in marketing. So like a lot of our life is sort of like a part of this ecosystem that's very like, I won't say flashy, but it's a lifestyle, you know,
sure.
and people value certain things, and people will consider certain things that have more things going on. And so a part of me, I would like to say that I go to the gym for mental health, but I don't sometimes. Sometimes I go to the gym because I just really want a six-pack. And I think that it's going to really help me get, maybe the partner that I'm interested in, that I'm too shy to talk to. So I'm not too proud to say that, I have insecurities, and that, I want to feel special too. And that I do things that are superficial and hopefully will, make people value me more. But I think the idea that I'm trying to communicate is that that's also rooted in trauma, and just trying to figure out, how we can sort of work through those things and be more about just like finding your own happiness and gravitating towards the people who love you regardless of those things.
I think that when people get into, at least and for me, if I'm going to get into a relationship, I am considering the work that it takes to be in one. And so I don't want to, like, I'm more intentional when I'm dating. I'm asking questions in the beginning, getting to know someone really, and on those first few dates before getting too far down the road, and a year later having that moment. Not to say that you can't still have that moment a year later and look up and be like, is this really what I want? But I think I'm less quick to just make a rash decision and be like, I'm done with this, and more inclined to like actually put in the work to figure out what's happening here, and having conversations and working through it. And then as it pertains to like the fat phobia and like wanting to look your best and stuff like that, I mean, we've talked about this like on that episode on it's called Skinny Legends. Wait, is it called Skinny Legends Only? Yes.
Skinny Legends Only, yeah.
Yeah, Skinny Legends Only.
We shout out to the titles. So creative.
I love
it.
We wanted it to be a little provocative.
A little spicy.
But we talk about the fact that people want, like, who doesn't want to look their best?
Right.
Basically. We think that regardless of what state you're in, of how you want to personally look, I think that most people do, strive to want to look their best, and there should be no shame in wanting that. So
yeah, it's the donuts for me. Look, oh man, we got some extra stuff over here. So look, no, I'm just kidding. But that's what's up. Yeah. So I got some questions I want to ask. We're gonna I have so much more that I want to talk about, but in the interest of time, we're gonna might have to have y'all back on here again. So are y'all gold star gay? Or have y'all been with women?
No. Yes, see, we're both gold star gays, but Damon, our third host, he is not a gold star gay, but we both are. Yeah, I'm terrified.
I always wonder, like, who made that phrase "gold star gay"? I gotta do some research on that.
I think I heard it for the first time on probably the L Word, or like one of those shows. Like I don't think it was
it's just something that's always been in the zeitgeist, and you're like, where did it originate from? But yeah, gold stars.
Gold star over here.
Have you dated a married man and didn't know he was married?
I had sex with a man who was getting married. that I didn't know he was engaged to be married.
Oh no!
Scandal. I was so taken aback when I was like, wait a minute, he's getting married.
I remember the revelation. I was just like, oh my goodness.
Sorry to this man.
Sorry to this man. Were you dealing with him and then?
No, it was like a hookup
I got it.
situation, and he was in town visiting from out of town, and that happened. Like, we knew each other from social media, and so we saw each other at a party, and then we ended up hooking up. And his social media, there's no traces of like him being in a relationship, let alone engaged. And so
To a
when
man
I
or
saw
woman?
that to a man,
Okay.
to a man. But I don't think I've ever been in a situation with a man who's been like on the down low, or not out, we'll say, and had a wife on the side. Or not on the side, had me
you on the side.
not a wife on the side.
A wife on the side. He said, I'm always the one, never the two.
Okay.
I'm the one, not the two.
It's the confidence for me.
Yeah, no, I don't think I have either. No, I don't think, and if I did, I still don't know. So I don't think I ever have. No, I don't think I've ever been with anyone who's married.
That's good.
I wish I had a fun story to tell.
No, that's what's up. And then I wanted to bring it back, obviously, to the mothership for us, Howard. Talk a little bit about like just gay culture at Howard.
It's the stories that most people who have gone to an HBCU know, like being at the time we were coming up in Howard, it's very taboo and just not accepted to be gay. And if you wanted to be a part of any organizations, like, you would be blackballed if they sniffed out, that's a possibility. Yeah, you had to be straight passing in order to really make certain organizations, and it was tough, and there weren't a lot of safe spaces back then, and it's different now. I see the difference with how queer life on campus is, and it's come a long way, but definitely was a bit of a scary space, because you're trying to figure out who you are, you're figuring out your sexuality, and you don't feel like you can really fully live in the moment. And so many people don't get to have that experience. I was able to have a queer undergrad experience, and I'm grateful that I got there somehow, because my experience was just so much more dynamic. But there's so many people that don't get to have that when they're undergrad. They come out after leaving Howard, and they don't get to have that full experience of being like gay and out and living that lifestyle while you're in college. It's so much fun, and you miss out on that. And a lot of people, that's the one thing I hear from people, like, I wish I was able to have that experience.
Yeah. Were you were out at Howard?
I was out. Like, I didn't necessarily have to be like, oh, I'm gay.
Right, wearing a rainbow flag or nothing like that. But
I was around people who were also like, they were gay, and then I was like, oh, I think I'm this, and I started just hanging out with them, and then by association, people just like know, like, and then once you realize for yourself, it's like, well, this is what it is, and I didn't really go out of my way to hide it. But I was still growing into that person. And once I found my core group of friends, and I lived off campus from like sophomore year through junior year, so that made it even more like, okay, I'm not even on campus like that. And all my roommates were gay, so it was just a gay old time.
must have been nice. Must have been nice. That was not my experience at Howard. I didn't have the confidence to be out, or to just sort of like be, I guess, more free with my gay expression. I was, for the most part, at Howard, I came out my senior year. So all before that, I basically just did not talk about sexuality. I did attempt to date a woman, I think my sophomore year. I couldn't keep that charade up for longer than a week. And I was like, I gotta go, I'm sorry. But
you're a really nice girl, but
you're a beautiful girl, but you should find somebody who wants you. And it was, it was really difficult. And to Tony's point, I had goals when I came to Howard, and my goals were, like not necessarily to even get good grades. My like I wanted to actually be really, really integrated in the Howard social scene, and I wanted to get an internship. One of those, the internship thing didn't really matter if you were gay or straight, but being social at Howard, and when I say being social, I mean like being in Divine Nine, or like being selected to be at the homecoming fashion show, like these type of things. Like there is homophobia in these institutions and in these organizations. And I remember my time at Howard University, there was this anonymous blog that came out called Juicy Campus. And it was basically just like a blog, but for your school, and people will make lists. So I was a part of a gay gay class of 2011 list. And then that sort of was read by everybody on campus. And then I found out that part of the reason why I didn't make an organization is because I was gay. And, it didn't really make me feel like that I should even do it, that I should even come out, like in terms of my sexuality. So I went further into the closet after that. So, I mean, it was really sort of like difficult for me to do it because I was looking for social acceptance at that time. And at that time it was kind of taboo, but I do think it's changing. And not to give it all away, but on surface level this season, we actually are talking to people who have studied the queer experience on HBCUs and talking about what progress is being made on campuses to liberate queer students. Because I'm seeing some of the social media of like the kids now, and there's so much more expression out there. People feel so much more comfortable just being like, this is who I am. Like, I don't need you to accept me. Like I'm building my own communities, and it's not just exclusively on this campus. Maybe I'm building an online community. So I think that times are changing, but in 2011, child, it was not my favorite.
Be in my closet, y'all holler at me later. No, yeah, that's a good point, because one of the guests was a teacher, and two of them, and both of them talked about how their kids that are like 10, 11 years old, and they're like, masculine presenting, and they're like, I'm a part of the LGBT community, and like they're just, and they talk about like how they're jealous. They're like, these kids are just so free. Like we were over here like wrecking our brain, like, oh my God, like how am I gonna deal with this? Like, suicidal thoughts, the whole 9 yards. And these kids are like liberated at such a young age. This will never be an issue for them, like just something that they won't have to deal with. But I think I give credit to our generation. I give credit to, us kind of taking those war scars and just saying, you know what? Fuck it, I'm just going out there, like I'm gonna just do it, creating these type of platforms where it's like normalized. And obviously having people like Lena Waithe who are not afraid of showing it, on TV, sometimes in a salacious way, but the representation is there, right, to start the conversation, to make people uncomfortable, but to make them face it, like we're here, this is what it is, like we exist, but then to see kids be 11 and be, so young, and being like, hey, like I'm here, I'm at Pride, Zaya, and that whole thing, like in though Gabrielle and Dwayne taking that position of like, well, being forced into that position, I learned, because Zaya was like, they need to use my right name, they need to use my pronouns. I don't know what they talking about. I don't know who that kid is. That is not me. Like, and them just being like, we got to get on board because we have to protect our kid. We have to make a safe space for her. So, I mean, I think all of the whole thing like makes for this universe where all these queer existences can happen. So I think it's super cool. So last question. There's a kid out there who's experiencing, or a young person experiencing queerness and trying to figure it out. What is your advice to them?
I would say, like, what made a difference for me, and I hear this from a lot of people who have a shared experience that I do, is having some fairy gay mothers, having an older gay in your life. If you know someone, like, I think that was just helpful for me, to just have someone that was able to like show me the ropes. And that's not always the case though, but like advice, outside of that, outside of maybe finding someone that can maybe, help you in that way and be sort of like a mentor, just taking things one day at a time, finding resources. Like, I think I didn't know to do any research to know that there might be things out there that that there are resources out there for me. Like, there are podcasts out there now. There's so much going on and so much content, like great content, like you're doing, like you're putting out. That if nothing else, it'll help them to feel seen and feel like they're not alone in this world and they're not by themselves. So that's just a couple of things that I can think of, like, quickly off the top of my head.
Yeah, no, I think that's big. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I like kind of like on Tony's answer, but like find just one friend, just one person who shares in your sexuality, who you can start to open up to, because it could be a very frightening experience if you feel like you're by yourself. And I think that a lot of times when people are sort of like unsure about their queerness, they're apprehensive about getting close to another queer person because, it's queer by association for a lot of straight people. But what I will say is that the value that you'll receive out of that friendship of being able to be open will hopefully be beneficial enough to give you the strength to tell yourself this is how you want to live all the time. I think what was really, really transformational for me at Howard was having my very first gay friend. And when I first met him, I was terrified of getting close to him because I thought that by getting close to him, it would out me to be close to him. But this person is actually my best friend, and I still like spend a ton of time with them years and years later. And it's because like this is where I felt the most comfortable. And I was like, you know what? I want to feel like this all the time. And I think that had I not moved into that friendship, I would have been comfortable sort of just being straight presenting and like trying to figure all these roundabout ways of expressing my queerness in the dark, which wasn't going to ever be fulfilling for me. Yeah. So find one friend and build from there.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, I got to thank you guys, Tony, Jordan from the Surface Level Podcast. Y'all go check out their podcast. It's awesome. It's a very transformational approach to queerness and those conversations. It's called Surface Level, but they definitely going below the surface, y'all. It's good. It's good stuff. So definitely, thank you to you guys, and definitely appreciate what you're doing for the community, and continuing to open up those doors for people to come behind us and feel more comfortable. So thank you guys. I'm your host, Ashley. This is Queerly Blax Show. I'll catch y'all on the next one.